Okay, well, we're at time, so we might as well get started. So I'll pass it over to you, Draydan, to kick us off.
Perfect. Okay. Hello. It looks like we have one attendant. So thanks for coming and checking this out. We're here today to talk about the zoning bylaw update coming into the city of Penticton here. Specifically of that zoning bylaw update, we're just going to be focused on the EV ready requirements for new developments. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm currently presenting from the unceded territory of the Sietz people of the Okanagan, and I'll run through a bit of an agenda. We'll kind of discuss what we're going to go over, and then I'll pass it off to the right people here. Okay, so first we'll start with introductions. Who am I and who is the rest of the panel here? Then we'll go into a bit of background about EV charging in the province. We'll go into the details of the actual EV ready bylaw changes that are coming. And then we'll get ChargeFWD, who's been kind enough to join us here today to talk about the experience of retrofitting versus doing it up front during construction. So from there, if you can bump forward to the introductions. So my name is Draydan Power. I'm the manager of energy and environment with the City of Penticton. I'm responsible for the electric utility and sustainability branch of the organization. I'm relatively new here. I just started in January. Prior to that, I was working for Fortis BC for 10 years. I tried my hand at a bit of all the engineering departments, but I landed in the last 12 months, so basically all of 2022, I worked as the manager of EV infrastructure and investment. So I'm very familiar with EVs. I'm very familiar with the technology. I'm very familiar with the challenge that could be upon us with adding all of this load onto our electric system. And I'm also very familiar with the rebate program and installing EVs in multi-unit residential buildings as well as single-family dwellings. So that's a bit of my background and my experience. And I'll pass it over to Danielle from CEA, who's helping facilitate this presentation.
Thanks, Jordan. Hello, everyone. I'm Danielle Wiess, Transportation Lead at Community Energy Association. We are a nonprofit with charitable status, and our mandate is to help government, specifically, or a lot of the time, especially local governments, with anything related to reducing their emissions and supporting residents and doing the same. So I'm happy to be here today and looking forward to providing some background as to why Penticton is enacting this EV ready bylaw at this time. Over to you, Ryan.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Ryan Chan. I'm one of the owners of ChargeFWD. At ChargeFWD, we do everything related to EV charging. So we'll do supply and install work, and we'll also do a lot of consulting work to maximize federal and provincial rebates. We've done work in Penticton, as well as all over Canada, and most of our work's in BC, but we've also done a bit of work in the States as well. So, yep, that's me.
All right, excellent. So now we'll pass it over to CEA to give a bit of background and start with some Zoom features and etiquette.
You got it. So just quickly on this Zoom webinar, so all participants are muted and the chat feature is disabled. We do still want to hear from you, of course, and to do so, just ask questions using the Q&A feature. Shows up at the bottom of your screen. If you do want to not type in your question and instead ask it orally, you can just choose the raise hand function, and my colleague Jalissa will be watching for that and can flag that for the rest of us panelists. So just a bit more about the background as to why Penticton is doing this now, as I mentioned originally. This image and this information is provided by a recent report completed by Electric Mobility Canada, or commissioned by Electric Mobility Canada, and completed by Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors. And basically what it resulted in is that BC here, this province, our communities are a global leader when it comes to zero emission vehicles. And specifically for that reason, it's because there are the core steps of adopting purchase incentives. So residents in the province who purchase new vehicles are eligible up to $4,000 in rebates. It's income qualified, so it would vary depending on your personal situation. The other reason is that in our province, there's private and public sector investment in infrastructure. City of Penticton has put in infrastructure specifically for public use, as has, the Ministry of Transportation, BC Hydro, Fortis BC, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of infrastructure, meaning people can choose to drive electric to the places they like to go. And finally, the provinces enacted a strong mandate for minimum EV sales. So 26% of new vehicle sales in 2026 is the goal. And then it increases to 90% of new vehicle sales by 2030 and 100% by 2035. So in just over 12 years, all new vehicles sold in the province will be electric. That means we have to do some work to make sure that everyone can drive and yeah, just easily drive around and have charging available to them at their homes and wherever else. And just wanted to point out that while this seems new, or perhaps is new in the city of Penticton, if you haven't been following along to date, certainly not the only community in the province who've been taking this action on. Quite a lengthy list on your screen now. And within the Thompson and Okanagan region, there's also the city of Kamloops, who just recently enacted this bylaw at the start of just this year. So, and this is just the beginning of the list, certainly not the end. We're facilitating a cohort here at Community Energy Association of other communities looking to follow suit. So by the end of 2023, you may see, 5 to 6 more communities on this list as well. So that's a bit about the why and the impetus for this bylaw at this time, but I'll pass it back to Draydan to talk about a few more technical details.
Thanks, Danielle. So we'll go briefly over level 1, level 2, and level 3 charging, just so we're all on the same page, because the EV requirement, the EV ready requirement is going to be mainly focused on level 2, but I just want to make sure everyone understands the difference between it all. So level 1 charging, what you have here on the left, as you can see, is a standard outlet in your home that you would plug any 120 volt appliance into. Now, on the very far left, you'll see that circular diagram that shows the actual connector that plugs into your vehicle. That's called the J1772 plug. That's the most common plug type that you'll see on all vehicles today for kind of low power charging, other than Tesla, which uses the same port no matter what, their proprietary connector. So level 1 charging, just if you were to plug in your vehicle to any standard home outlet, it will get you about 1.7, 1.8 kilowatts, okay? And for normal driving behavior, that will typically require about 8 hours of recharge to get back topped up off of level 1. So not impossible, but of course, if you do any more than just your groceries and pick up the kids from school kind of thing, then you'll need a much longer duration or a higher power charger in order to get you topped back up and ready to go for the day. So that's level 1. We'll go to level 2. So level 2, you'll notice on the very far left that the connector that plugs into your vehicle is still that J1772 plug, but now the other end has been plugged into a charger that is usually either wall mounted and connected to what you see there, which is like your standard receptacle for an oven or for a laundry dryer or something like that, or it could even be directly hardwired into the wall or into your electrical circuit. Level 2 can go all the way up to 19.2 kilowatts, excuse me, so significantly higher output. Now, while this is the possibility of a level 2 output, it's very rarely the case. This is usually only reserved for very specific fleets. Typically, what you'll see on a level 2 charger in a normal home is around the 6 to 8 kilowatt range, and I put 7.7 there because that's the standard breaker size that you would use and what we've required in the EV charging bylaw. So if you've put a level 2 charger in your home and it's able to charge full out, then you'll typically be able to top up your vehicle on normal daily driving habits in about 1 to 2 hours. And if you're down to 0%, you'll need to be plugged in at least overnight, but usually around that 9-hour mark is a reasonable recharge rate for a level 2 output. And level 3, the big one. So this is DC fast charging is the other name for it. And it happens because it's actually doing the rectification of the energy on a charger. And so you'll just get DC directly into your vehicle, which means you have to use a bit of a different standard plug in order to get that energy transmitted. So now on the very far left, what you see is you still have that shape of the J1772 up top, and those 2 prongs that are usually normally done for transmitting the energy are now just there as kind of a placeholder, and the actual power is being delivered through those 2 prongs at the bottom, the DC plus, DC minus that you see on there. So it's quite a bit of a bigger connector. It's quite a bit heavier. The cables are bigger, but of course with that comes that higher power output that you're looking for. So you can get up to about 350 kilowatts today, and that's depending on the type of charger that you're connected to. Most out there are 50 to 100, and you're starting to see some of the Electrify Canada, PetroCan units really get up there in range, be able to put out 300, 320 kilowatts if just used individually. And just to give you an idea of kind of what those different power outputs will get you, From 50 kilowatt, kind of spitball numbers here, it's you know, the rate that you charge is always dependent on your battery state of charge, the heat of the vehicle, of the compartment or the battery stored, all those kinds of things. But you know, spitball numbers, a 50 kilowatt charger will get you from low to nearly topped up in about an hour and a half. 100 kilowatt could do it in about 45 minutes, and 150 kilowatt could do it in about 30 minutes. So you're getting closer to that gas station experience of in and out, a quick stop on a road trip and getting back on your way. And one note that I do always make when we're looking about this is just kind of interest outside of our bylaw, know your vehicle's capability, right? So if you're charging at a fast charger and it can go up to 100 kilowatt, you want to make sure your vehicle is capable of charging at 100 kilowatt. But anyways, what we're going to be focused on now is level 2. Okay, so now we'll get into the details of the actual bylaw that's coming through. Okay, so first we're going to talk about residential requirements. So the minimum number of energized outlets for level 2 charging is 1 per dwelling unit. Okay, and when we talk about EV ready and an energized outlet, what I want to specifically mention is that this means that the electrical infrastructure is completely in place so that the end use resident only has to put a charger on the wall or on a post and plug it in. That means that all of your electrical calculations for adding that load upstream have been already completed, and you have capacity on your panel, your room and your electrical room, all of it is taken care of. A conduit is installed from the electrical room all the way out to that parking stall. There's a wire in the conduit and it's terminated at either an outlet that we looked at before or a blanked off junction box that can be hardwired directly to the charger. Okay, so when we say EV ready, we really mean it is ready, not including the charger, right? Everything up to but not including the charger is done and ready to go. Okay, so again, for a residential building, a single family home, a carriage house even counts, a town home, anything like that, you need 1 EV outlet in the garage, ideally wherever the parking is, per dwelling unit. Okay, so for a multi-use residential building, for an apartment complex, if you have 100 units and 120 parking stalls, you need at least 100 of those stalls to have an EV ready outlet installed at the location of the parking stall. Okay. So just a quick note that parking spaces for secondary suites are exempt from this requirement. Again, carriage houses don't typically fall into secondary suites like a basement suite. They would require an additional EV outlet, but you know, a basement suite does not. And just a last note that where there is a requirement for 1 or more accessible parking spaces, like in a multi-unit residential building, at least half of those accessible parking spaces must have the EV ready outlet installed in front of them. Okay, so that was the residential. Now we're going to go into commercial, which feels a lot of the same, except for just the volume kind of changes. So these, you need to do a minimum of 2 EV ready outlets for the first 10 required parking spaces, plus 2 for every 10 additional parking spaces required afterwards. Okay, and if you're wondering how many parking spaces you need for a commercial building, that is going to be outlined in that. If you can go back 1 slide, just in that that bylaw there, 2023-08 will speak to the definition of a parking space and how many are required for the different types of commercial businesses. And just a quick note on the commercial side there too, if you do require accessibility parking spots, that again, you have to have a minimum of 50% of those spaces with energized outlets ready for EV chargers. Okay, so that's kind of a high level what you need, but the technical requirements are what we're going to go into. So as I said before, the definition of EV ready, it can kind of be miscommunicated amongst the industry these days. And what's the difference between EV capable and EV ready? And do I have to put a wire in the conduit, or is it just a conduit? And again, this is the upstream electrical infrastructure is completely installed in place, ready for that load. And you have a conduit and wire going out to the parking stall with either a blanked off junction box or a receptacle that is available to plug a charger directly into. So if I live in a multi-unit residential building or a single family home, and I decide that I want to get an electric vehicle and I buy a charger, all I have to do is go and put the charger on the wall and plug it in, and it's ready to go. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like in order to actually get it installed. But for that upstream electrical infrastructure I've referred to, that's where we've actually made a little bit more requirements, okay? So you need to have at least 1 40 amp breaker dedicated to service the EVSE, the electric vehicle service equipment, okay? So if you live in a single family home, it's a 40 amp breaker that feeds that electric vehicle service equipment. If you live in a multi-unit residential building, what that could mean is that, and this goes for commercial as well, you can put a single 40 amp breaker and you can connect it up to 4 chargers. that'll use a mechanism called power sharing. So essentially what that means is that any individual charger can charge up to that 40 amps, but if all four are working at the same time, they would scale appropriately between them so that the power is split evenly. So if you had 4 on, it would be 20 or 10 amps each. Sorry, if you had 2 on, it would be 20 amps each. And if you only had 1 on, you get the full rate of that level 2 charger on the 40 amp breaker. And this is commonplace technology that's available today. And what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of conduit and wire that's required by the developer to be installed at the time of construction. And by the way, if you do reduce it and you kind of get that 4-to-1 rule, it's going to give you about the same minimum output as a level 1 charger, which is what we feel is appropriate as a bare minimum to get people back on road for daily driving habits. And there's also one more piece of technology that we'll look at on the next slide here. So as you can kind of see in this diagram, what I spoke about on the left is a dedicated circuit. 140 amp breaker, it feeds a receptacle or a charger directly, and that is where you're getting that full 40 amp output from that charger individually. Doesn't matter what the other ones are doing, that's a dedicated circuit just for that one charger. And on the right, what you can see is circuit sharing and EV/EMS, which I'll speak about in a minute. But that circuit sharing or power sharing is what I was speaking about when you have a single 40 amp breaker that has one run of conduit and wire that goes out and feeds those 4 individual chargers, which could be in adjacent parking stalls next to each other. Okay, so on top of that power sharing capability, which is kind of what you could consider like a dumb energy management system in the sense that it's not network connected, you can add a software system on top called an EV energy management system or electric vehicle energy management system. And what this will do is it'll monitor the total output of all EV chargers at a time. And it will say, you are never allowed to peak above a certain value, right? So that's really important when you're designing the electrical system of your building. So you can tell your utility, yeah, you know, by section code 8 of the electrical code, I know I have a demand of 175 kilowatt for my normal building. And oh, by the way, my energy management system for my electric vehicle parking has a peak output minimum or maximum of 150 kilowatt. Well, there's 2 values that you feed into your utility. Utility then is able to size your service appropriately. Okay, but again, with that energy management system, you have to have a minimum output of at least that level 1 equivalent, so about 1.7 kilowatts or about 10 amps at 208 volt, which is what the level 2 will use. One other note here, just before I pass it off to ChargeFWD, is just, you know, a little bit about why we're doing this. This directly aligns with the Community Climate Action Plan. You know, one of the biggest contributions to greenhouse gas emissions in the city is transportation, and we want to encourage you know, our residents of the city to actually go ahead and buy an electric vehicle. And we know it's prohibitive for especially residents who live in a multi-unit residential building to get an electric vehicle if they aren't able to take advantage of one of the best benefits of driving an EV, which is to always leave home with a topped up tank, so to speak. So, you know, we want to make sure that this is really accessible and that all those barriers that we see with retrofit challenges are addressed as early as possible when it can be the most cost effective. And that's what I'll get Ryan to speak about from ChargeFWD on this next slide.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so at ChargeFWD, we work with a lot of condos and townhome stratas to electrify their parking areas. So typically we walk through with them like a 3-step plan. So the first step is to get the EV ready plan in. So that's just a report saying this is the amount of works that needs to be done before you can be EV ready. The second stage is to actually do the work and make it EV ready. And then the third stage is to actually hang the EV charger on the wall and activate it and commission it. As you can imagine, working with a lot of stratas, the most difficult thing that they have is to open up their wallets, to spend the money and to agree on one single plan of how they're going to do something. So by kind of implementing these bylaws, it kind of skips over a lot of the argument and a lot of the debating of, you know, what approach and what timeline should the strata take to implement EV charging. And with the conversations we've had with different stratas, especially for new builds, some form of EV charging is almost an expectation as a part of the build, because the adoption of EV vehicles have been so high in BC over the last few years. From 20 2021 to 2022, the amount of EVs that have been purchased in BC has doubled. So as the years goes on, and as the market develops, that there will be more and more of an expectation of being able to charge your vehicle at home, right? So by having these bylaws, it saves the strata and the residents a lot of heartache and a lot of effort, and it kind of puts them ahead of the curve in terms of the cost of retrofitting, right? As you can see on the slide, it costs almost 3 times as much to retrofit after the fact than doing it as a part of the initial build. So to save everyone a little bit of time and money and effort, what we recommend is for the city is to have these bylaws in place, so everyone is kind of on the same page, and the early adopters don't get an advantage for installing their charger early, and everyone else has to kind of deal with whatever's left. So this is what we're behind the City of Penticton and the rest of BC to implement these bylaws. All right, and I'll hand it back over to Draydan.
Perfect. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah. So I mean, the EV, this bylaw is obviously focused on new builds, but the city is also looking at how we can support retrofits as well, because we know that that's important for the existing infrastructure to be able to get chargers in there and accessible to the current residents. So while today the focus is obviously on new development, it's not by any means the only thing we're looking at, and we're very open to feedback. We're very open to questions, whatever people want to say or reach out to us about. We're completely available to talk about it, and we're taking in information. So with that, I will open it up to questions. See if there's anything. I don't think there is anything in the Q&A.
Not yet in the Q&A, but perhaps George or
hey George,
Llewellyn
yeah,
wants to come off mute.
Is it Llewellyn?
It's usually Llewellyn,
Llewellyn.
but we'll find out.
Hi, my name's Llewellyn.
There you go.
Llewellyn.
We're both wrong. Llewellyn.
We're
I'm
both
just going
wrong.
to
Yeah,
send my
sorry,
question here. Am I
Okay.
the only attendee?
No, George is here too. George
Okay.
before us.
Good evening.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. I see your question. So I'm currently doing a renovation and adding a secondary suite. I plan to install an EV charging station. Are there any rebates to help with this cost? Yes, absolutely. So George is here from Fortis BC. Fortis BC manages the Clean BC Go Electric program, and they offer rebates for purchasing EV chargers right now. And I believe the rebate is still $350 for the cost of the actual charger itself. You need to show that you pulled a proper electrical installation permit and all those kinds of things with it, but you'll get $350 back off of the cost of the charger at least. Is that correct there, George?
That's good.
That is correct. Yeah, still in place and expected to be in place for at least until the end of next year. I'm pretty optimistic it'll be further than that.
Excellent. So yeah, you can just apply through the Fortis BC website, which I think we even link to through the City of Penticton EV page as well.
Okay. And as a home designer, are there any resources that I can find out all this information? This is the first that I've heard of it with the announcement of this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a really good point I forgot to bring up in the first section, is that the bullets that I pulled, as well as that one diagram and even more diagrams, are going to be posted into a bulletin, which should be available in the next week or so. We're just finalizing some mock-up drawings of a single family home, actually, to show exactly what it would look like in our opinion, and just some detailed drawing notes. So yeah, we'll have a full bulletin that's going to go into a pretty long-winded description about it. Gives you definitions about what each acronym means and all these other funky things, as well as an example layout of how you could actually wire it and where you could put it. And again, this should be available with the bylaw as soon as it's released here in the next couple of weeks. But the bylaw itself actually doesn't have a ton of information in it. It just speaks to the number of outlets that are required, and to dig into all the rest of the information that we talked about today, the size of the breaker and what is EV ready, all those kinds of things will be in that bulletin. So great question, Llewellyn.
And I would suggest that as a follow-up to your attendance today, we can certainly ensure that the bulletin is emailed to you, so long as you provided that information in your registration.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Perfect.
I just did a development permit for 4 duplexes on Argyle Street. There was nothing required for that. I don't know if that project is going ahead at this moment. There's a lot of discussion in the background because of change of purchases of the property, and I'm just trying to find out more information going forward if the EV charging stations will be required. We did put in a note for EV charging ready for each of the units, as something to align with, I think, these upcoming bylaws that were proposed. This was a year ago that we were going through the development permit process. So it's good to know that there's more information forthcoming about these new requirements.
Definitely. I'm glad to hear you have an accommodation in there in advance of when you're technically required to, because I honestly believe it's also a great idea. But no, that's great. Depending on when your permit actually goes through, you may or may not be technically required to do it. But let's pretend it was going through as soon as the bylaw was formally adopted. Then yeah, you would be required to be putting an EV charging receptacle in each garage that is wired out right back to the panel on a dedicated 40 amp breaker. So that's yeah, and you just need to factor that in with your electrician when they're kind of building out the load calculations for the panel. It's, I'm not sure what size of service that you typically do for a duplex, but gone are the days of 100 amp panels for the most part, we believe.
Yeah, it'd be typically a 200 amp panel.
Yeah, and that'll be more than enough. We know from utility data that there is typically capacity on an existing panel. Even my home as an example, I have a 100 amp panel. And if I look at my actual demand compared to my calculated demand, I know I actually have capacity for a panel. So the city's actively looking at ways that we can allow retrofits to more accurately know their load and to actually fully utilize their equipment. But for new builds, a 200 amp panel is going to have more than enough capacity. Even if you have, heat pump and electric range, I'm sure you'd probably be okay there.
Yeah, thankfully, my home already had a 200 amp service. It was built in 1966. So they were very forward thinking, I guess, back in the day. And,
no kidding. Yeah.
We've already been planning to buy an electric vehicle. And, this seminar has just, come around at the right time. Our construction right now, everything is open downstairs. We've got a new secondary panel for the main floor, and then we're making the original electrical panel is the panel for the secondary suite. Will there be requirements for an EV ready secondary suite?
No, we've specifically left that out. So in your exact example, actually is a great example of that, where if you're creating a legal secondary suite and you're maybe adding a sub panel or something like that, you are not going to be required to, as part of the renovation, to put in an EV charging receptacle. Now, most may take advantage of the opportunity to do it anyways, but no, you wouldn't be required by the bylaw as per the current writing of it.
Now, could you get a rebate or any additional EV charging stations that you put in that are not required by the bylaw?
No, right now the city's focused on just acting through the bylaw, and where we are going to put our funding is through supporting, and again, this is early stages, but the programs that we're considering right now is trying to fund some multi-unit residential building retrofits, because we know, if you look at a single family home, and don't get me wrong, I know it's a gut punch to go through, buy an electric vehicle and then have to go and buy a charger and then potentially look at a service upgrade too. I feel for you, but we know that the bigger pinch point is on these strata councils who are responsible for potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs, even after the maximum Clean BC rebate. And they're never able to get really a vote through their strata council or through their residents, because only a couple of them have EVs, and they're going to miss an opportunity on the rebates that are available today, because eventually those will dry up. And then when that happens, it'll be eventually the right to charge will come through potentially, and then they'll be enforced to do it at full cost. So we want to try and help those those cases the most right now, because we think that's where the least likelihood of investment will be from residents. And it's more likely that if an owner such as yourself were to buy an EV, that they're typically going to go forward with the charger. And don't get me wrong, I feel for you, but the funding right now is going to be focused on those biggest needs right now that we view in the city.
Mhm. Now, for the EV charging station that I'm planning to put in, I haven't shown it on the plans. So will that still be, will the rebate still apply?
Oh yeah, so let's separate this out here. So when you're going to do a new development, let's say, you don't actually have to put the charger in at all. You just have to put the receptacle for a charger in the future in. And as long as you show the receptacle in the plan, that's going to get you past the bylaw requirement. Now, for your example with the retrofit where you actually want to buy the charger, all George is going to look at is the actual charger invoice plus the electrical permit that you use to install it. You don't need to be providing detail. I mean, you need the actual cost of the charger, like an invoice receipt. But beyond that, in the electrical permit, you don't really need to be providing detailed drawings of the renovation package or anything like that. And correct me again if I'm wrong here, George.
I'll just add in advance to double check that the charger you're interested in is on the eligible list. So in addition to everything that Draydan has pointed out, it's quite a vast list now. Basically, if it's sellable in Canada, it's likely on that list. But I always recommend double checking before you buy if you're intending to get that rebate.
Another question that I just thought of is the rebate just for the EV charging station, or does it apply to the from the panel to the receptacle?
It actually applies from the panel to the receptacle, but it does max out at $350 with a 50%. So if your charger is $700 or more, you're going to max out the rebate on just the cost of the charger alone. But yeah, let's say you had a free charger that came with your electric vehicle, which does happen. As long as that charger is eligible and you can produce an invoice for your vehicle that shows it was included with a charger, then you would be eligible to get that $350 back, as long as the electrical work from the panel, as you pointed out, great example, from the panel out to that charger, the labor and the materials, the receptacle, all that. If it was $700 or more, you would also max out your rebate that way.
Yeah. So at this point, we're just taking it from the panel to the receptacle. We don't currently have an EV.
Right.
We've been looking. There aren't too many all-wheel drive EVs available in an affordable, price range. So you're looking at Teslas or Ioniq 5, or you're looking at 65,000 minimum for an all-wheel drive, which we need in the location that we are in the city of Penticton. So I guess the rebate would just apply in that case, just to taking it from the panel to the receptacle. Now, which receptacle would be recommended?
So I'll just correct one thing and then I'll answer that question. You actually have to buy the charger or actually have to get a charger with the vehicle in order to qualify for the rebate. So you can't apply for that rebate until you've actually put a charger on your wall, kind of thing. So even if your charger was $0, it comes with the vehicle, but you get that rebate as soon as you've made that purchase of the vehicle that came with the charger, kind of thing. So you do actually have to have the charger in order to be eligible for the rebate. But then, all of those other pieces that go out to the charger are eligible costs, but you have to buy the charger before you get it. And then to answer your question, or sorry, what was the second part of the question again?
A recommendation for what type of
receptacle.
Receptacle. Yeah.
I would chicken or the egg. I would probably pick your charger first, and then like a charge point charger, you can specifically get it in a 1450R receptacle or a 650R receptacle or a hardwired version. So depending on the charger that you're getting, they'll have a different requirement of the outlet or receptacle that you need. So make sure you just check the specs on the actual charger that you end up getting, and that'll tell you exactly what you need to do.
Okay, so the rebate doesn't apply to making a residence EV ready.
Correct.
Okay, it's just once the EV charging station is installed. So
yeah.
So none of the cost involved from taking it to the panel to the receptacle are covered under a rebate.
Well, they are eligible, but only once you buy the charger. And this is the requirements of the Clean BC Go Electric program. So we absolutely love it here in Penticton because we're eligible to participate in it, but we don't administer it. This is the provincial rules that they've set forth. Correct. And George from Fortis BC does administer that program. So is that still correct there, George?
It is, and I'll add, like, if you are envisioning there's going to be a bit of a time lag between purchasing your EV and wanting to get that infrastructure installed, but you're wanting to have both considered, that's something I'd be certainly willing to talk to you about offline. You can fire me an email at ev@fortisbc.com, and I'd be happy to talk through the iterations of what you're specifically planning with respect to purchasing your charger and installing the infrastructure.
Yeah, it's like putting the cart before the horse.
It is, but it is, and this isn't my panel, but there is value in taking that step to get the infrastructure in place, recognizing you do need to make a decision on a receptacle eventually, but you could actually terminate at a junction box initially, and if you're not certain of what kind of charger you want to purchase, and then that could be a future smaller electrician visit to change out that junction box for a specific receptacle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, right now is the time to do it during the renovation where everything is opened up.
Yeah.
And
it's a very fair point.
Just put in the wiring and not the receptacle.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I would almost recommend. I can tell you, there's a very cost-effective level 2 charger out there that I've seen a lot of people purchase. It's the Grizzly. It's made in Canada. It's pretty robust and it's relatively inexpensive. I think it's about $700 what you can get it for right now, or sometimes even less, depending on your vendor. And at this point, if you know you're going to get an EV eventually and you're going to be wiring out the receptacle at a time where you have the wall open and it's the right time to do it, you could just go forward and guarantee that rebate right now, right? And I know George said that he expects the rebate system to go on for quite some time, which is fantastic news, but no time like the present. If you know it's coming and there's a cost that you can get a rebate on, then it's a good option. But also, as I said too, just one thing to consider is that if you get an EV, if you wire everything out right now and you don't get a rebate on that, but you buy an EV charger down the line that is $700 or more, you're going to be maximizing that rebate anyways. So yeah, that's just something to consider, that it may end up working long term for you. Even if you take on a little bit of those costs up front now, you'll still potentially maximize your rebate.
Yeah, so now is not the time to apply for the rebate. It's when you purchase the charging station.
Correct. And you'll almost always maximize it. Even if you get everything ready up to now and lose some of those eligible costs, you'll almost always maximize the rebate anyways on just the cost of the charger.
Okay. So for multi-unit EV ready charging stations, there's no rebates for construction costs at this point to make them EV ready, just when the charging station is put in. So that's something that the individual homeowners would be able to apply for.
Well, yes, but just as a note actually too, is that a new build doesn't qualify for the rebate program with the Clean BC provincial rebate program. New builds are expected as per the bylaw to have the EV ready requirement. And when a customer decides to install that charger, unless the home is older than 6 months, they wouldn't actually be eligible anyways for those costs. So, the Clean BC program is very much a retrofit oriented program, whereas what we're doing here with the bylaws is oriented towards the new developments.
Okay, so with the new developments, having them EV ready is a requirement now?
Yeah.
Okay, but there's no cost that can be recouped.
Correct.
For that. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, that's good to know, because I'm just going through the process right now with the developer. Yeah.
Yeah, almost all rebate programs out there are targeted towards retrofit.
Okay, I think that's answered all my questions.
Excellent. And Danielle has a really good comment in here. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk to you about it because I worked with Beach Tech quite a bit. Beach Tech is a supplier in Kelowna who sells a lot of Grizzlies. He sold a pile of them. We've seen a ton of them approved, and I haven't heard many bad things about them. They hosted the Electric Mobility Canada conference out in Toronto last year, and they were showing some videos of the manufacturing system in Canada. It looked pretty good. Was it overheating? Is that what you've heard, or what? Because I know they had a black unit that was mounted outside, and it it was overheating quite a bit, but that's why they made the Avalanche edition, or a white one. What else have you heard?
It's just more on the communication side. Challenges with keeping it upline, but we can chat that offline.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, do you have any more questions? Otherwise, I think we'll wrap this up for today, and we'll thank everyone else for participating, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, so just one last question. Was 40 amps recommended for the charging station circuit?
Correct. Yeah, 40 amp breaker.
Okay. I'll make sure my electrician puts that in.
Perfect. So this is adding to the sale price of a unit for the good of society. Is society, through the city, providing a rebate or incentive? And so just to clarify that, Chris, are you talking about a rebate or incentive on actually the additional costs of installing this infrastructure in a development?
Yeah, exactly. Can you hear me?
Yep, you can hear me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's being done when the building is built, so that's paid for by the developer. So they would need to recoup that with the sale price of this unit. So is the city providing any kind of rebate or incentive to, not just increase the price of every unit? Because people can do this after the fact, but as you pointed out, perhaps it's cheaper for society to do it when the unit's built.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and definitely something we've thought about. But at this point, we are not going to be incentivizing, putting this in. We've kind of taken the approach of requiring that the bylaw requirements will actually enforce this, as opposed to trying to incentivize people to do it. Now, that being said, we do have a lot of other incentive programs for transportation, for electrification transportation, whether it's bikes or EVs through charging, or we have the chargers that we have available in the public today are free for the first 2 hours. Among other things that we're trying to do here. So definitely hear you on that. But for new developments, the intent is that you're required by the bylaw. For retrofits, that's where we're going to be trying to add some more incentives and value for some other programs that are going to be announced in the near future.
Thank you.
We'll do the awkward 10 minute, or sorry, 10 minute, 10, that'll be a long time, 10-second countdown for any additional questions or comments, and then we'll wrap up for today. And if we didn't know at the beginning, this session was recorded and will be available via the City of Penticton website shortly, and so we'll be able to provide links and resources to the PowerPoint and the information shared today.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions, even outside bylaw, just about EV charging in general or EV adoption or anything like that, the panel here is pretty knowledgeable, so feel free to take advantage of our time if there's no other questions.
All right, well, seeing none, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Have a great day. Thanks to our fellow panelists, and looking forward to seeing Penticton join that group of leaders across the province with regards to EV ready bylaws. So take care.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for your question, Chris. Take care.